Apportez l'épée.
Imagine being forced to watch your own body burn while you're still breathing. This wasn't just death, it was theater, a chilling ritual that was meant to not only kill the victim, but also make him disappear from the collective memory of the society. The term hanged, drawn, and quartered is known by all, but most people view it as simply a medieval mode of execution, one often mentioned or referred to in films and history books. Nonetheless, the actual practice turned out to be very different. It was a very inhuman and cruel way of killing, whose main purpose was to scare the whole nation and eventually to force them to give in. This sentence was not for robbers or murderers. No, it was only for one type of crime: treason against the king. The moment you rebelled against the king, your fate was sealed. Great figures such as Roman Catholic martyr Guy Fawkes and Scottish patriot William Wallace went through this very same ordeal. However, it is not killing fast that people miss the most. It is about ceasing your totality, body, soul, and even memory. Every single phase was carefully orchestrated to be executed in such a way that you would be the very first, and that no other person would dare to rise against the crown ever again. Before a single rope was tied or blade raised, the terror began with words. The law didn't just condemn you to death, it erased you. At that moment, you stopped existing as a person. Your name, your honor, your legacy. The royal decree stripped everything clean, like you'd been scraped out of history. What came next wasn't punishment, it was purification through pain. Society wasn't meant to remember your beliefs or your rebellion, only your suffering. From that point, you were no longer a man. You were a warning, and your body was about to become the message. And here, the nightmare actually started. Not yet would mean your insides would be yanked out when they said you would be drawn. It meant you were actually dragged to your demise. You would be carried across the town like trash after they would bind your arms and legs to a wooden frame or perhaps straight to a horse's tail. Your skin ripped apart on the cobblestones. The soil sealed your cuts. The throng adored it. They spat, swore, and flung stale food. Your pain into kilometers of endowment. Every breath bore the mud, the blood, and the deceit. The trip might cover kilometers, hours of humiliation before you even arrive at the gallows. Your body was ripped and your spirit was barely hanging on by the time you arrived, and the goal was to guarantee that the man who reached the scaffold was already half dead, battered not just by chains, but also by the eyes of his own people. The true torture began at the point when you thought things couldn't possibly get worse. The hanging was aimed at slowly stealing your life away, not at doing it abruptly. In a normal execution, the fall would instantly, almost mercifully, break your neck cleanly. But it was not here. As you kicked, turned, and struggled for air, the rope gradually tightened and cut your throat. Every pulse was like a scream in your head while the world was turning dark. Your hearing was affected by the audience. The distant shouts and applause were mixed with the flow of blood in your ears. Then, when you were almost dead and your body limp and your sight blurred, the death dealer's knife cut the rope. You fell like a doll with its stuffing taken out and hit hard on the rough wooden platform below. The air was cruel and sharp as it simultaneously came into your lungs, and you were alive, almost gone, and exactly what they wanted. For this was not the end of the program. The crowd was so hungry for the next act that they turned in. And as you blinked between the pain, breathing heavily, you realized that the most terrible part of your punishment had not even begun. This was the moment horror peaked. The word drawn at last disclosed its real nauseous meaning. The living death penalty man was stripped bare and bound. The killer, with a very patient and skilled manner, came in with a shiny knife, and the sunlight lit the knife. Then there was the long, slow incision through the abdomen. The skin was torn apart, blood gushed forth, and the audience was made speechless due to shock. It was no longer punishment, but the act of desecrating the body. The hands of the cutter delved into the body of the victim through the open slit, taking out the insides one after the other. First, the intestines, which looked like ropes on the floor, then the liver, and sometimes even the testes. The person suffering was aware and conscious all the time and could only see, breathing in pain that no man should ever experience. The whole performance consisted of every movement and shriek. This was not a hurried job. It was done with care, a masterpiece of fear calculated for the audience to witness. A fire was set up next to the gallows, and it was not intended to provide heat, but rather to inflict pain. The executioner, in a most horrible manner, threw the entrails into the flame while the person was still alive. Consider this: the person was able to witness and smell the process of their own body turning into ashes. It was the worst degradation and the last blow to one's pride. The message could not be clearer. A revolt would result not only in death, but also in death-like torment for eternity. The kilometers are deep. Burning the organs wasn't random. It represented the destruction of vitality, masculinity, and identity. The man wasn't just dying, he was being unmade before his own eyes. The king's power wasn't in the sword or the rope. It was in this display, this spectacle of human suffering turned into royal control. It taught everyone watching that defiance would lead to a fate worse than hell itself. Finally, when the screams grew faint and the eyes turned hollow, the executioner raised his axe. The crowd held its breath, almost relieved. This was the mercy blow, the only kindness in an ordeal, built to strip away everything that made a person human. With a heavy strike, the suffering ended, but the memory of that horror would linger for generations. The only consolation left for the patient suffering through disembowelment was death. The executioner was ready with the axe up, and his face was like the mask of a man who had muffled his emotions under the surface of duty. The crowd that had been roaring with excitement only moments before now, in the stillness of death, expectantly waited for the last act. A mere clean and quick swing let the axe fall, and the suffering of the prisoner was finished in no time. The executioner raised the head cut off above. The blood that was still dripping from it mingled with the shouts of joy, a dark celebration of the power of the king. Yet, even in death, peace was denied. The body's suffering was far from over, for the king's message demanded one last horrifying display. The corpse was hacked into 4 pieces, each cut symbolizing rebellion crushed and erased. The remains were boiled in tar or soaked in salt water, preserved not for respect but for spectacle. Denied burial, the body became the property of the crown, a warning carved in flesh. The head was spiked atop London Bridge, greeting every traveler with its frozen scream. The 4 quarters were scattered across the kingdom, nailed to city walls and castle gates, declaring what awaited defiance. For weeks, sometimes months, the pieces decayed under sun and rain, their stench mingling with fear. People passed beneath them daily, reminded of who ruled their lives. The execution was never just punishment, it was theater, a public sermon of obedience. The king's authority was portrayed as divine, his power reaching beyond death itself. Each mutilated display preached submission and loyalty through horror. For centuries, this ritual silenced rebellion and shaped obedience through fear. Even after the bodies rotted, and as time moved on, the terror it inspired endured. It remained lawful until 1870, a chilling reminder that control founded on fear can outlive the rulers who created it, echoing across generations as both warning and legacy. Today, when people hear hanged, drawn, and quartered, it sounds like a phrase from some distant barbaric past, an exaggeration used in stories or jokes. But the truth behind it is darker than most can imagine. It wasn't a quick death or even a slow execution. It was a complete dismantling of a person. Every stage, from humiliation to torture, was crafted to erase not just life, but identity. The condemned was not only killed, he was unmade piece by piece, turned into an example of what happens when power feels threatened. Remembering this ritual isn't about fascination with gore, it's about recognizing how fear once governed justice. It shows how cruelty was turned into control and how suffering was used to teach obedience. The phrase remains a chilling reminder that when authority loses compassion, justice becomes nothing more than a performance of pain. This wasn't execution, it was erased. A punishment so brutal it turned the human body into the crown's final warning. To be hanged, drawn, and quartered was to die piece by piece until even your memory was ash. So what's your take on this? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury.